DW Africa Link.
Kenya and Tanzania, good neighbors or bitter rivals? Well, in recent times, the latter seems to be the case. Tensions have been growing between the two East African neighbors. That's after Kenyan political figures, including former Justice Minister Martha Karua and activist Boniface Mwangi, were detained and deported from Tanzania while attempting to observe the treason trial of Tanzanian opposition leader Tundu Lissu. This led Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan to issue a warning against foreign interference. She asserted that activists from neighboring countries will not be permitted to, quote, meddle in Tanzania's affairs. So, what does the ongoing public and political spat mean for the concerned countries in the East African Community Bloc? And how can tensions be eased? That's what's coming up. I am Eddie Micah Jr., and you are welcome to Africa Link, the podcast connecting you to the stories that matter.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
The ongoing spat between Kenya and Tanzania has drawn the attention of the United States. The U.S. Bureau of African Affairs said on X, formerly Twitter, that it was, quote, deeply concerned by reports of the mistreatment of Ugandan journalist Atuhaire and Kenyan activist Mwangi while in Tanzania. They are calling for an immediate and full investigation into the allegations of human rights abuses. Now, this comes days after they were detained and reportedly tortured before being deported. The spat has also played out very publicly across social media, and it may be getting ugly. To help me discuss this, let's bring in Ruth Ambogo, a Kenyan lawyer, governance consultant, and political analyst. I'm also with Andrew Wasike, DW correspondent in Nairobi, Kenya. Hello, welcome to the program, both of you. Andrew, you've been closely following this friction between Kenya and Tanzania. Tell us more about the current situation and how the tension is playing out between the countries involved.
Hey, thank you very much, Eddie. So the current situation, everything has gone sour. This is after Martha Karua and Boniface Mwangi and a group of Kenyan lawyers were detained and deported from Tanzania while trying to attend Tundu Lissu's treason trial. The whole thing has sparked immediate outrage, especially given the stature of the individuals involved. We have also had our own issues here in Kenya with the opposition, so this is nothing new to us. But what is new to us is this diplomatic standoff between Kenya and Tanzania. On social media, the conversation has exploded. This is what I've been following very, very closely. Kenyan youth in particular have been vocal using platforms like X and TikTok, and they are calling out what they see as an attack on democratic values and regional solidarity. Remember, Kenyans are usually, they're always on the internet, and also Tanzanians are on the internet, and both parties have got their own views on the matter. So the situation has really, really escalated. And after the deportations, many people are asking whether there is that unity among East African countries. Remember, just a day before, Tanzanian MPs were defending their government stance and criticizing what they termed as imported activism. Meanwhile, Uganda has not issued any official statement regarding the treatment of their citizen, who was also arrested in Tanzania. Her name is Agatha Atuhaire. So though reports indicate that she has returned home, the overall situation has just ignited debate online across East Africa. Yeah.
Right. I mean, before I come to you, Ruth, I'm going to stick with you a bit, Andrew, because talking about how it's played out, or it's still playing out, social media, it's turned into a little bit of an ugly back and forth, hasn't it? I mean, we're talking about even people hacking into people's accounts and systems, and it's not pretty.
It's not pretty at all, because people are saying that now this is where we are saying that the region is not united at all, because we have had cases where we have had accounts being hacked into by either side. I will not say if it's Kenya or if it's Tanzania, and all this stems from this political move. They are terming it as a political move because Tanzania is saying that you're interfering with our internal affairs. Kenya is saying that, okay, we have a duty to do,
Right. So both sides hacking each other's accounts. I understand also like influencers' accounts are being hacked into, and this whole thing is turning into some sort of ugly / ridiculing event. But to the crunch of it, especially to the legal side of it, Ruth Ambogo, let me come to you. As a lawyer, what are the implications of Tanzania detaining and deporting foreign nationals who come to observe a public trial?
Well, thank you for inviting me to this conversation. And I'd like to just pick it up and say that first and foremost, we must understand why this conversation between Kenya and Tanzania is very important, and why it is brewing a lot of emotions and reactions from both countries. This is because, first of all, we exist in a regional entity called the East African Community that was established by a treaty that was signed by all the countries that subscribe to the East African Community as members. So meaning that the treaty that established the East African Community is one that binds us together and dictates how our affairs should be run as the countries that are member states to the same. Now, this particular treaty is one that was supposed to bond us as countries that subscribe to it in various ways. For instance, our relations on as to how we trade, movement of people, movement of goods, our general diplomatic relations. So basically, the East African Treaty establishes how we should be able to relate. And as part of that treaty, there are certain clauses that have been, established in the treaty that basically provide rights and freedoms of members of the East African Community. And amongst those rights and freedoms is the freedom of movement, freedom of entry in and out of various member states of the East African Community. So it is from that particular point of information that the whole conversation begins, that we have a treaty that dictates that we should be relating in a particular way, that the particular rights guaranteed to members of the member states of the East African Community include the fact that I, as a Kenyan, can freely move into Tanzania without even necessarily requiring a passport. I, as a Ugandan, can travel to Kenya without, requiring any form of, extra documentation other than my ID card. And basically, the whole aspect of regional formations is to push certain agenda, economic agenda, political agenda, social agenda, and we sort of share a common, we kind of share a common history in the sense that we all sort of also got our independence around the same period of time. And when you look at the history of the East African Community, we have traditionally been known to be people who work together, especially with Tanzania. With Uganda, I might not be very sure about how our relations are, but with Tanzania, we have shared a cordial relationship for quite a long period of time. If you might remember, their president actually, their former president, Magufuli, died while receiving treatment from Kenya. So we've had this cordial friendship and relationship between Kenya and Tanzania that at this particular point where things are going south, a lot of things are being exposed about our leadership styles, with the various countries, our toleration for, human rights promotion, because the fact that these people were, these lawyers these lawyers were simply, going to observe the trial of Tundu Lissu, who is, I would call it political. It's basically the nature of his trial is political in nature. He has friends, he has friends from all over. He has the right to have his friends go and support him. He has the right to have people like myself who would be interested.
Sorry not to cut you. So in a sense, was it legal or not, based on the East African Community's principles and rules and guidelines? Was it legal or not for Tanzania to kick these activists out?
Well, the answer to that question would be, what basis did they have to kick these people out? I mean, there is no bit of the treaty establishing the East African Community that dictates that there is an offense called meddling in the affairs of another country, you know. What would lead to someone being deported would include whether that person has participated in criminal activities, violation of immigration laws, you know, fraudulent paperwork when you're trying to move from one country to another, being involved in a felony, you know, crimes of moral, you know, crimes that are moral in nature. But did these individuals who went to Martha Karua and her team, did they in any way pose a threat to their national security of Tanzania? And if they did, wouldn't it have been proper to go through the proper legal channels of dealing with people that you suspect are meddling in your affairs, even if you want to call it, if there is such an offense as meddling in the affairs of another nation? Then first of all, where is that law anchored? You know, is there a law that dictates that for if you meddle, and what exactly is the definition of meddling in the affairs of another state? I mean, the only thing that would make sense for us to say these individuals, Martha Karua and her team, and the former Chief Justice, and Willy Mutunga, and you know, Boniface Mwangi, the human rights activist from Uganda, Agatha, if indeed they had intentions to commit a crime and these intentions were established in law, then they should have been processed through legal ways, you know. Take them to arrest them in the right manner of arresting an individual, as opposed to what happened to Boniface Mwangi and Agatha, being abducted and being tortured, you know, because torture and abduction is not anchored in law. It is illegal. It is against human rights. It's against the Treaty of East African Community. And even just the basic denial of entry into a country without grounds, proper grounds, in itself is against the treaty that establishes the East African Community. You know, so basically what Tanzania has done, in short, politically speaking, and even legally speaking, the leadership of Samia Suluhu has exposed itself as one that is not, does not pay attention or does not have regard for East Africa community relations, number one. Number two, human rights. Number three, you know, basically just general cordial relationships between countries.
Right. So how does this incident affect regional relations, particularly between Kenya and Tanzania? And of course, you can throw Uganda in the mix.
Of course, you know, the one thing that Tanzania needs to appreciate is that I've been listening to their debates in parliament, and they seem to be suggesting that they don't need Kenya at all. And, you know, they seem to be suggesting that they are okay on their own, and yet a great percentage of Tanzanian persons from Tanzania seek medical help in Kenya. There's a lot of trade relations taking place between Kenya and Tanzania that, if shut down, would affect the livelihoods of so many people who rely on doing business in the countries, in both countries. And even just generally speaking, when we are fighting for democracy, when we are fighting for the rule of law, I mean, the fact that we cannot check our brothers and sisters is a problem in itself, because it goes to point out that something heinous could be happening in our neighboring country. And I mean, just because we are talking about sovereignty and countries standing on their own and nobody meddling in the personal business of other countries, we would let a lot of things go unchecked. I mean, look at how Kenya relates with other countries like Congo, the war in Congo, the war in South Sudan. We have naturally been, in the past, we have participated in bringing peace in countries that have been fighting. We've participated in assisting countries that are trying to develop their democracies. So I believe the whole essence of this unity of the East African community is supposed to foster a brotherhood that would put us to a point where, when a leadership of a particular country is violating human rights, is exceeding the excesses of proper channels of dealing with persons who dissent to government or whatever is happening in government, then we need to have that system of checks and balances. So I feel that this current hostility between Kenya and Tanzania would lead to future, just people sitting down and saying, you know what, it's your country, it's your business, we don't care. And yet we could have stepped in and, helped whichever country, be it Kenya or Tanzania, that would be going through whichever tough times they'd be going through, fix their issues.
Andrew, you've talked a bit about how Kenyans have been reacting to all of this, and it's basically also what Ruth and Bogo is adding to. Basically, it's been a back and forth, everyone showing why, either side needs the other. A battle of, it reminds me almost of Ghana-Nigeria battle, right? Who who has the best this, who has the best that, and we don't need you, you need us kind of battle. And that's still going on a lot, Andrew, isn't it? But while you talk a bit about that, also let us know what the Kenyan government's official response to these events have been, and how is the government addressing, the situation diplomatically?
So far, the Kenyan government response has been measured but cautious. There has been a statement expressing concern from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which calls for respect for regional cooperation principles. Just like Ruth said, we are part of the East African community. So there's a way we have always related. However, many people feel that here in Kenya, many people feel the government's reaction has been too soft. There is a sense that Nairobi is quite hesitant to push too hard diplomatically because of the delicate relationship we have with Tanzania, because we do a lot of things together with Tanzania. But that hesitance is being criticized here in Nairobi.
Right. And Andrew, still on you. Are there any, possible implications of this spat on freedom of movement and expression between both countries, for instance?
Definitely. Tanzanian politicians have been talking in parliament about this. So I feel like this incident has sort of raised concerns about such issues like cross-border movement and how people can express themselves across the region. Many civil society leaders and also legal experts are warning that if Tanzania can block and deport Kenyans so easily, it kind of sets a dangerous precedent where Kenya can also do the same, So the East African community is, our partnership is at stake because it is supposed to guarantee certain freedoms, including the freedom of movement and association. But such an incident will definitely show that those rights can be easily undermined when politics gets involved. This could discourage activists and also legal professionals from engaging across the border. Remember, because our lawyers do not only work here in Kenya, they have a right to practice across the East African community the way they want.
That actually takes me back to you, Ruth, because I want to get your take on if there's been a sort of a precedent for lawyers from one East African country representing clients in another, right? And what does this current situation suggest about cross-border legal collaboration?
Well, there have been quite a number of incidences of lawyers from East African countries representing clients in other jurisdictions other than the countries that they come from. Because remember that there is already we have the East African Law Society, which is basically a conglomeration of all lawyers from the East African community, meaning that there being an East African Law Society is, which first and foremost, part of the principles of the East African Law Society is the freedom to practice in other jurisdictions, so long as you have the clearance to do so. Don't forget that the very Martha Karua actually went to represent Kizza Besigye, and I think the trial is still ongoing. She's done that in Uganda successfully, of course, with a lot of resistance at first when she went there. She almost faced similar circumstances that she faced in Tanzania. And she's done it in the past as well for other cases. And even Ugandan lawyers have represented. Remember, we also have the East African Court of Justice, meaning that cases by East African lawyers can be prosecuted at the East African Court of Justice, which is actually located in Tanzania itself. There has been even a precedence of a case regarding the very question of limitation of entry of persons from one member state to another. There was a matter at the East African Court of Justice that involved a gentleman called Simon Muhochi. And it was against, the matter was Simon Muhochi versus the Attorney General of Uganda, where in the same matter, it was decided that, the limitation of freedom of movement goes against the principles or the treaty that establishes the East African community. So there have been several instances and cases where lawyers have practiced cross-border practicing. So it's not something that is foreign. It is established in the East African community treaty that establishes the East African community.
Right, especially ahead of elections later this year. In trying to wrap it up, I mean, we've talked a lot from the Kenyan side, but Andrew, you've also been weighing how Tanzanians have been, reacting to all of this, including how they're reacting to their government's actions and the statements being made. What are they saying?
From what I've seen, the Tanzanian public opinion is sort of mixed. Some Tanzanians see their government's action as justified, as a way to protect national sovereignty and stop what they see as foreign interference. Though the same ones who are supporting the government are actually arguing that Tanzanian affairs should be handled internally without outside pressure, because they have their lawyers and they have the activists also. But there is also a strong sort of undercurrent of criticism, especially among opposition supporters and human rights advocates. They are questioning why it's only this time that Tanzania feels threatened by observers, and why it's treating even legal representatives from a neighboring country, Kenya, who Kenyans have always been their friends. We consider themselves our brothers, our sisters. Why they are treating legal representatives from Kenya as a threat?
Ruth, you have the final words in trying to help us, give steps that you think should be taken to prevent the escalation or further escalation of this, sort of diplomatic conflict or spat between the two countries.
Well, I think the two presidents need to sit down and understand what is at stake. I always say that, I mean, if something were to happen in Kenya, Tanzanians something catastrophic were to happen in Kenya, Tanzanians would be greatly affected, and so is the vice versa, the same, that if something was to happen in Tanzania that is so catastrophic, Kenyans would be affected as well. I mean, so we must realize what is at stake for us. Tundu Lissu's issue is, I wouldn't say is smaller than what is at stake, but I would say there's the bigger picture, which is that we share a lot in common. We do a lot together. We are bonded by trade agreements. We are bonded by agreements that are supposed to help us grow as a community, that if we overlook or if we undermine, we would end up losing, both of us as great countries that have shared, proper relations in the past together. And so for me, I would just urge the presidents to sit down, sort this out, and also that more agitation should be taken into account to ensure that the human rights violations that took place, especially for these activists, Agatha, Boniface Mwangi, and anybody else who was affected, that the same be prosecuted, and those responsible, especially those who are responsible for sexually violating Agatha, be brought to book, because these are scenes that are very ugly, coming from a country that has not been known for such. And also, even just as I close, for women in leadership, I mean, it is putting us in a very awkward position as women who have always advocated for women in leadership, because now we are being put to the test. And the question for us is, if really are women leaders an option? So we have difficult answers to that question as women who've been pushing for more women in leadership positions.
Right. And I'm hoping that both leaders of Tanzania and Kenya, even Uganda, are listening to you on ways to sort of de-escalate. I mean, as you said, the US has even called for investigation into the allegation of torture of the Ugandan journalist and all those that were involved. So, as you say, it's a case that's being looked into. Tanzania has not officially accepted or rejected that allegation of torture, but as you say, definitely is something that has to be looked into. Ruth Ambogo, Kenyan lawyer, governance consultant, and political analyst. Thank you very much for your time. Also, Andrew Wasike, DW correspondent in Nairobi, Kenya. Thanks to you both. Now, compared to East Africa, West Africa generally presents a more open judicial landscape for human rights activists. In many West African nations, governments and courts allow activists to bring cases and attend court proceedings of interest. Critically, The ECOWAS Community Court of Justice explicitly champions human rights, granting individuals and NGOs direct access. This more accommodating approach in West Africa offers valuable lessons for East African nations who could significantly enhance transparency and accountability by allowing their own regional activists greater participation in judicial processes. So what do you think about all of this? We value your thoughts and encourage you to share them with us on our Facebook page, that's DW Africa. Listen to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast from. And don't forget to click follow and subscribe to our DW Africa YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. This show was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabe. And I am Eddie Micah Jr. Thanks for listening.